Welcome back to the Exalted Podcast. I am super excited to have my friend Brad Watts with us here today. Brad has a very impressive list of accolades. So he is the Director of Clinical Applications at Biogenetics. He is a doctor of chiropractic who is also trained in functional medicine, podcast host, and just an incredible man of God. So I'm really excited to have you here today, Brad.
Hey, thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy
Happy
New Year to
New Year.
you. Brad and
Yeah.
I have known each other for a long time. Him and his wife have been my personal doctors, and we are related by marriage through extended family. So we have kind of a fun relationship. But I'm always so impressed with just the vast knowledge you have of the human body and how it works. Right. So take me back to like you went to chiropractic school, and
Yeah.
then you guys remind me how you got interested in functional medicine.
So I remember sitting in grad school and nearing the end of my terms, and I was like, I just don't know if I can do this the rest of my life, like a neck and back clinic and
Sure.
treating pain and all this stuff. And I started getting really involved in nutrition, and I started learning things that I was like, I need to know more about this. This is the information that I need. And so I started connecting with doctors that are practicing in the functional space,
Yeah.
and I tripped and I fell, and here we are 12 years later. And I'm just kidding. It's really great. It's a really weird ride, but um, I don't know that I would do it any differently. It's
Yeah.
a really interesting area to practice in.
So for anybody that's listening that doesn't totally understand what functional medicine and because I know I didn't in the beginning, can you just
Sure.
give a brief synopsis of how that looks different from a doctor of chiropractic or just like a medical doctor?
Right. So a doctor of chiropractic typically is going to be working on spine and, musculoskeletal issues.
Right.
And that's great. And they're the best in the world at it. And while we can do that, um, there are a lot of people that are really engaged and that's their passion. And then you have this
Right.
other side of things where nutrition and functional medicine come into play and really about not necessarily treating chronic disease, but specifically supporting people so that they can live a healthy and vibrant life. And so it's things like what you eat and
Mhm.
looking at laboratory chemistry in order to customize a lifestyle for somebody, a lifestyle that's compatible with health and healing rather than one that is essentially compatible with sickness and disease. And
Right.
so that's really what we're looking at are laboratory measures and then developing a strategy for the person to go and deploy at home.
Right.
So
And what I
yeah.
love about it too is that you look at the whole body, right?
Mhm.
You don't just look at the one symptom or the one lab. How is that interacting with everything else that's going on? The one memory I have really vividly, and I know you've treated several of my family members, but I don't know if you remember this, but my oldest son had had a seizure, and that's the only health issue he's ever had. My youngest has had a whole slew of stuff going on. And he had another one a couple days later, and this one was very, very minor, but I took him to children's and I wasn't getting a lot of answers. And so I sent the lab work over um to you guys, and you guys were able to see that he had a virus and that he had, he was dehydrated, and you were able to see all of that from the lab work. And that
Yeah.
actually helped me put a plan together to kind of treat him on my own because I never did get any answers, and he's been super healthy ever since.
Yeah.
So that's what I love about it is that we look at all the things, not just where we can, prescribe a medication or something like that. So
That's right. So one of the things that commonly happens is you'll see labs from somebody and you'll say, "Oh, here's what's going on, X, Y, and Z,
yeah,
like dehydration
yeah,
or whatever." And they go, "Well, how come the medical provider didn't find that?" Right? And it's
yeah,
because we're looking at the same lab with a different set of glasses.
yeah. That's so good.
And so the laboratory ranges that you find on like a standard blood chemistry that you would run at children's,
Mhm.
they're looking for pathology, right?
Right,
They're looking for disease, and
right.
and we're looking for dysfunction, right? Which
Yes,
is or
so good.
function. It's called
Yeah,
functional, healthcare.
yeah,
And so when you're looking for function, instead of using a lab range that is two standard deviations from the mean, we're using a lab range that is tighter. It's usually one standard deviation from the mean.
yeah.
And so
So
that
good.
we can see dysfunction before it turns into full on pathology. Like, if you have a fire in your kitchen, you probably want to put it out while it's in the oven, rather
Yeah.
than waiting till the whole house is engulfed in
Yes.
flames.
So good.
That's the same idea that you practice with like a functional style of care.
Yes. That is such a great explanation because
Yeah.
I'm not here to bash, regular medical doctors because
No.
I've certainly had my life saved by them, but
Yeah.
it
Same.
helps to reframe like
Yeah.
that lens of what we're looking through, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
good.
So medicine right now, um, for the most part, medicine is the best in the world at acute care,
Sure.
like trauma issues and surgical interventions. Like they're the best in the world, you know. And if that's what I need, don't don't bring me to see my wife, right? Like, don't do that. But when it comes to lifestyle, you know, and living a lifestyle, as I mentioned, that's compatible with health and healing,
Yeah.
that's a different ball game, you know. And I mean, obviously, as you can see over the last 2.5 years or so,
Yeah.
it's a different ball game.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. If somebody is listening to this and they're like, don't know anything about nutrition, or maybe
mhm.
they're experiencing some symptoms, like what's one quick tip that you could give from how people can change their diet just quickly that could make a big difference that people aren't aware of?
Yeah, that's a good question. The biggest thing that I see in the medical literature, which is where I spend most of my time these days, I'm not in practice any
Yeah.
longer. You know, we've moved to more of a teaching role,
Hmm.
and you know, and working with biogenetics. And so, what I find is that the medical literature explicitly talks about inflammation as
Hmm.
being the main player when
Right.
it comes to developing chronic disease or
Right.
even getting bulldozed by acute diseases like you see in the media all over the place, you know,
Right.
today.
Yeah.
Inflammation is the key player. So your inflammation is what your body does in order to kill a virus, in order to kill a pathogen, in order to repair a tissue, right? And if you're
Hmm.
spending your inflammation on a diet that is not compatible with health and healing,
Yeah.
the virus shows up, you have nowhere to go because you already spent all of your inflammation on your food,
Yeah.
right? Or, you know,
Exhausted like what your body could handle.
exactly. Or
Yeah.
like diabetes shows up as a result of, you know, 20, 30 years, type 2 diabetes,
Yeah.
of eating a pro-inflammatory diet. And so if somebody's looking at what do they do from a nutrition perspective to help their own health, what I would do is I would start looking at what does an anti-inflammatory diet mean?
Yes.
Right? And realizing that if everybody around you is sick, like 40% of the United States today, United States adults over the age of 20 are dealing with obesity. Well,
Mhm.
obesity in itself is a gateway for all of the other chronic conditions that you see, you know,
Yeah.
plaguing the US right now, diabetes and autoimmune diseases, just
Yeah.
all the stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so if you go, all right, well, if you want to shut the gate, what do we do? Well, you eat an anti-inflammatory diet, number one, and learn about what that means and just
So
do a
good.
little research as to like what is driving inflammation in my own body,
Hmm.
because it's going to be a little different for each person. If I tell you go follow the anti-inflammatory diet at this website, you might do that, right? And you might get 40% of the results that, you know, your husband does,
Right.
right? Because he has different physiology than you.
Hmm.
And so it's about finding out for yourself what makes a difference, you know, in that world of anti-inflammatory diets for Jen or Aaron or Austin, right?
Right.
So,
So good.
yeah,
It's so good. I love that you just said like you can do the research on your own, but go figure
yeah,
out like what works for you. Because if I hadn't done some of those food labs that I did, I would have never known of the things
mhm.
I was reacting to. Right.
Well, that's a good thing to bring up. So a lot of people go, well, I can't, you know, I don't have the finances in order to run the testing in order to figure out what my body's sensitive to.
It's come so far.
And yeah, and what used to cost, you know, $3,000 even 10 years ago,
Yeah.
you can get for $100 now.
At
It's
home.
amazing
You can
at
do a
home.
little kit at home.
At home.
I know the first
So
time we had to travel to lacrosse to have it done and it
yeah,
cost us like 4 grand out of pocket. Now I can just order a kit at home. So
that's right. So, and it's one of those things where even if people don't want to do that, like just hit some of the main players,
Yeah.
the main food groups that are causing inflammation in people, high histamine foods, etc.
Right.
And just check it out. Just remove them for 2 weeks and see how you feel.
Right. I would
So
I would add to that, like the heavy hitters are sugar. I mean, sugar is so
yes,
inflammatory in the body, but even just like eliminating gluten and dairy for a little bit to see how you do, or one of those, right?
yeah, yep,
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to change tracks for a second and let's talk about what it's been like to be somebody that understands the body so well in this last 2 years. Um,
yeah,
when
yeah,
everybody's believing that masks and staying away from people are the things that keep us healthy.
yeah.
Um, but you and I know that it's really what's going on in your own body that has you susceptible to getting things. So what's that been like for you?
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to that. Um, but let's start with like I call it like the physical layer, the physiology layer.
Yeah.
Um, what you're finding, and it's starting to come out it was been in the medical literature on PubMed or in the US, National Institutes of Health databases
Yeah.
for years already at this point. But inflammation and obesity are what are predisposing people to getting wrecked by COVID or any other viral stressor that you can see. Okay.
Right.
And it's in the medical literature. The fact that the majority of the population doesn't read medical literature, they read news. And
Right.
so we're taking our information, we should be anyway, with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
and just read it and see what the scientists actually have to say, not what the interpretation of what the scientist said has to say, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. Um, one of the things I didn't see happening right when we started learning about COVID is I didn't see the political world using it as a cudgel to whack each other with,
Mm,
the way that we have over the last 2 years.
yeah.
And I mean, people that are in powerful positions are going to do what they need to do on both sides of the aisle to try to keep those powerful positions intact.
Right.
And it's unfortunate because we have a population that is already sick, is
Mhm.
already, dealing with the effects of living the standard American lifestyle. And then now we have this extremely contagious pathogen that wrecked some people's lives,
Right.
right? I had COVID, and I was
I
ill
did too.
for
Yeah.
2 or 3 days, and I was like, all right, well, thank God I'm healthy and
Right.
my family's healthy, and it's great. But you also have these people that are, stuck after living 40, 50, 60 years the standard American lifestyle. What are they supposed to do? They're getting bulldozed
Right.
because it's an aggressive pathogen.
Right.
And so I kind of feel bad for those people. And there's two types of people in that camp. There's the person that says, just tell me what to do. I'm ready to make a lifestyle change because the crisis showed up. And
Yeah.
then there's the other person that's like, I'm not going to change anything I'm doing. Right. I'm just got to sit here and deal with it. Hopefully I come through it, but everybody else needs to change what they're doing to protect me.
Right.
Right. And I also see a point in that.
Yeah.
So from a physiology perspective, if people don't have the building blocks for a quality immune response, or they've wasted their immune response on, pro-inflammatory foods,
Right.
you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
And so the medical literature, and part of what I've been doing is pumping out research documents for, providers around the country that show what they can be doing to support quality immune system response in people
So
that
good.
are already healthy and people that are not healthy and those that have autoimmune diseases. It's pretty
Right.
interesting.
Yeah. That's
Um,
so good. I love how you explain that. So it dawned on me that people might not know what inflammation feels like
yeah,
in their body, right?
yeah.
Because it shows up different for different people.
Hmm.
Can you just give some examples of what that might feel like in your body?
Yeah. So let's pretend we're playing basketball in the driveway and I slip and I sprain my ankle.
Yeah.
Okay. That ankle will get swollen. It starts to puff up,
Yeah.
right? And that's inflammation that's coming to a local spot.
Okay.
Inflammation, typically inflammation is supposed to be a localized reaction, right? Like if I sprain my ankle, my head doesn't swell up, right?
Right.
That'd be a little weird.
Yeah.
Um, but that swelling will allow the white blood cells and all of the different things that show up to eat the damaged tissue, repair it, and then it move on. And the ankle swelling goes down over time. It might take a week or two, and it's supposed to be a reparative response. Okay.
Yes.
Well, what happens when it's not a localized reaction? What happens when I'm eating food that my body's now sensitive to?
Yeah.
Right. And, maybe it's not even the food itself. Maybe it's a chemical that was sprayed on the corn you're eating, and your body's fine with corn, but it's not fine with whatever the chemical is. Okay.
Right.
So now that chemical gets into your bloodstream, and where does your bloodstream go? Does it go just to your ankle?
Right.
No, all the places.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's taking place now is we're creating that ankle swelling, except in all of the cells of the body. So all of the cells of the body are getting irritated by that chemical because it's being spread everywhere.
Right.
Okay? So it's not a physical injury, it's a chemical injury.
Right.
And so that chemical injury doesn't usually stay localized. Right. So another thing that you could think about is if I scratch the back of my hand here,
Yeah.
and I just keep going, right, for like the next 10 minutes. It's
Right.
going to get red, and it's already getting red, right?
Yeah.
It's going to get red, and that's called a wheal response. And that wheal response is inflammation on the skin, right? The chemical that I was just using as an example gets into my bloodstream, and it creates that same type of inflammation all over my cardiovascular system, okay? And because that chemical is irritating the same way that my fingernail is irritating the back of my hand right here. Right. So that's an inflammatory response. So that's designed, it's inborn. It was put there by your creator to have a response to, a foreign entity, okay, whether it be a pathogen or a chemical, like a man-made chemical, for farming, or coming out of the back of it. As a truck drove by out my window here, coming out the back of a truck.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that response, that immune system response, gets hyper when those stressors don't go away, because what am I going to do? I'm going to have more of those chips with the chemical sprayed on the corn today after dinner, right? I'm going to have more of those.
Yeah.
And so that response never goes away, like the addition of that chemical, the exposure. And so your immune system never calms down, and we don't give it a break. Like our bodies are amazing that we can last 75, 80 years living the lifestyle that we do. It's stunning. Right? Like I'm sitting at a desk. I'm going to do this for the rest of the day today.
Yeah.
Sitting at a desk. I'm not out walking, getting my heart rate going. Although I'll probably do that later. I'm going to be sitting at the desk for the majority of the day. Right? I'm not hunting and, tracking my food and bringing it back for the family. Right.
Right.
And so what happens is we have this lifestyle that our bodies just aren't built for. We haven't adapted to yet either, hence all of the chronic disease in the United States. And and it's just interesting how when we look at inflammation as the enemy, okay, and I say that, and immediately people that are listening to this are going to go, but I thought inflammation could be a good thing. Okay, yes, it can be a good thing when it's transient. Okay?
Sure. Yeah.
But when it's constantly showing up, like rain is a good thing, but not when it's raining 365 days a year. Nobody likes that, right? But rain is a good thing.
Right.
Same thing with inflammation. So,
yeah. So what might that feel like? Like you gave the example of the corn and the chemical reaction. Like how might that show up in the body?
Brain fog, fatigue. You need to take a nap after lunch. Right? Or you need coffee at 2:00 just to make it till 5.
Right.
Okay. Joint pain is a big one. Skin lesions. So people get like dermatitis. They get skin tags showing up, eczema, rashes, all of that. The cognitive situation for most people, I think, is the biggest one. Think about if you had to go through schooling again, could you do it? Right? Or do you feel like maybe your nervous system function has peaked at some point, right? Could you do it? That's the question. And so like, in my world, they're all doctors that I'm working with, and most of them will tell you, okay, that there's no way that they could take their board exams again. No way. Why? All that information is done and gone. Is
Mhm.
right. They're in practice mode. They're not in learning mode.
Yeah.
Okay. What about irritability? What
Mm.
about a short trigger? Especially, as you see the Christmas holiday and New Year's and everything like that that just went through,
Yeah.
and kids are not in school, or if you're
Yeah.
homeschooling, like how short is your trigger? How quick do you get irritated? Right? And that hopefully was a longer fuse or a heavier trigger back in the day.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so looking at things like that, obesity is a big one. Weight gain, weight loss
Mhm.
resistance is another one.
Yeah.
High blood sugar, hair loss,
Yeah.
eye damage. Right.
Yeah.
So you get blurry vision as you age. That's not normal. It's
Right.
common, but it's not normal.
Right.
And you see the signs and symptoms of people's bodies dealing with inflammation, and it's slow breakdown,
Mhm.
right? Slow breakdown over a lot of years, and you wake up and you're like, wow, I'm 40. What happened? Right?
Yeah.
Or you wake up and you're like, yeah. So this is when you'll hear all the time, man, after 40, it was just downhill with my body. I don't know what the deal was.
Right.
Okay? Well, what that should be saying is that my lifestyle needs to change because my body can't tolerate it after 40 years of it.
Yeah. Mhm.
So
So
it's
good.
interesting.
As you were listing all those symptoms, I was just
Yeah.
thinking of like how many of those could be interpreted as something else,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like how many of those could you just
Right.
go round and round and round if you were trying to address them and never
Mhm.
find an answer because the root cause is still
Well,
there.
that's interesting because most of the time people are okay with symptoms if they have a rationalization for it,
Mm,
right? Like, um, let's talk about, well, it's January. Let's talk about weight loss resistance, right?
sure. Yeah.
So you got some people that maybe they gained, the average person, by the way, in the last 2 years has gained 17 to 25 pounds.
Wow.
Okay. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
And it's just because of the situation, right? But let's say the average person has weight loss resistance. It's January. They're trying to lose weight now and get their life back in order. And they can't do it.
Mhm.
Right? And so they go, well, I wonder what's going on with that. They go to the doctor and the doctor goes, oh, you have insulin resistance. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Well, you have prediabetes. And the doctor is like, well, it's a thing. Okay, well, I guess that's why I can't lose weight. Back to the couch, right?
Yeah.
And not realizing that a diagnosis should really be your starting point. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be, the closed door, the end point.
Yeah.
So if I got a diagnosis of a condition of some sort, I would ask this: why is it there? Right? Why?
Mhm.
If you ask why 4, 5, 6 times, and like you're gonna get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So for most people, it's because there's something in their body that shouldn't be in their body. Most people have no idea because nobody looks. Modern medicine doesn't look. Modern
Right.
medicine would rather give you metformin for your insulin resistance,
Yeah.
okay, a diabetes drug, than ask you if you have like too many phthalates from the type of lotion you're using that's causing it.
Yeah.
Like that would be, think about this, right? If you have phthalates in your body from your food and from your cosmetics and your lotions,
Yeah.
and that's what was driving your diabetes, and nobody ever found that, and they just gave you a med to compensate,
Right.
I'd be irritated. I'd want to find that out,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And it's 2022. We can know these things,
Right.
right?
Yes.
There's this term that I don't know when it was generated, but within the last 10 years, called diabetogens, right? Like you've heard of carcinogens,
Mhm.
things that cause cancer. Like
Yeah.
nobody would go up to the back of their car and just start huffing the carbon monoxide coming out of there because they'd be like,
Right.
well, I don't want cancer, right? And so we have these things in our environment though called diabetogens, and there are a lot of them,
Yeah.
a lot. And there are tests in the marketplace that you can test to see, are these things that you're dealing with, okay?
Yeah.
And it's amazing. So like diabetogens that are also contributing factors for autoimmune diseases like
Mm.
Hashimoto's, multiple sclerosis, even when it comes to like autoimmune hepatitis, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just super interesting. What's in my body that shouldn't be there is always a question that I would ask if I got a diagnosis.
Yeah. That's
Like,
so
because your
good.
body's amazing. Like, it's been created in such a way that, like, the edges of a cut heal together.
Right.
Think about that.
I know, it's amazing.
Like, the military is always trying to make self-healing armor and stuff like that. You already got it. It's just a little slow, right? Or like think about that. If I get a cut on my hand, it stops bleeding at some point unless I never stop cutting it,
Right.
right? If I wake up every morning and it's part of my routine to grab the knife and open up my finger again, it's never
Yeah.
going to heal.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
if you have a chronic condition or symptoms, you have to ask yourself, where is that wound coming from?
Right.
Right? What's
Yeah.
in my body that shouldn't be in my body? That's a big deal.
Yeah. It's so
So,
good. I mean, I
yeah.
struggled with eczema my
Mm,
entire life until I eliminated dairy and gluten. Like,
yeah.
and nobody, I never knew. I had gone to the doctor over and over and over throughout the years, and I never knew that they were connected ever. And then
Yeah.
so as soon as my son showed up with eczema, I was like, oh, we're taking away gluten and dairy. And he's
Mhm.
never struggled with it again since. So I love that. If somebody wanted to get that diabetogens, is that how you said it?
Yeah. Yeah. If you
Where would they find that test?
Um, so there's a lab called Vibrant Wellness, and they I mean, they have some amazing tests, and they have a lot of them. Okay,
Okay. I'll go
but
check that out. I'll link
it's a
that in the notes.
toxicity panel. Essentially, is what you'd be looking at, and I just use diabetes as an example because it's a common condition. But
Yeah.
like if my kids had ADD or ADHD, I'd be asking that question: what's in their body that shouldn't be in their body?
Yeah. Hmm.
Right? Um, it's easy to try to avoid foods that might be triggering
Hmm.
a condition, but it's hard to see if that food might be, helping or hurting. Here's what I
Yeah.
mean by that. For a lot of people, they have eczema,
Hmm.
right? And they remove dairy from their diet, and the eczema might go away, or gluten,
Hmm.
right? But what if it's not actually a gluten problem or a dairy protein problem? What if
Yeah.
it's actually a chemical that's coming with the
Yeah.
dairy
Hmm.
and the gluten that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? And so what happens is we got to determine the difference between the two. So some people will say, all right, well, I'll just go organic first. Okay, well, you start eating organic grains, and most of those grains aren't tested the way that these high profile companies will test their products for heavy metals,
Right.
et cetera. So you're eating gluten-free grains that are high in lead and you have no idea. You're like,
Right.
well, it's not gluten and I don't feel any better, right?
Yeah. But you
And
just
it's
replaced
because
it with
of what's
something else.
exactly, it's what's piggybacking on those grains.
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about all of the different variations of how how that thing could be showing up in your body, that's not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Um, just be creative, right? So be creative. But Vibrant Wellness, they do a good job. And it's called a total tox panel. They look at heavy metals, they look at organic, pollutants,
I'm pretty
they look
sure
at
we did that with
molds.
Austin back in the day, my youngest son. I'm pretty sure we did
Yeah,
that with him. Yeah,
yeah.
that's so
The
good.
molds are another big one.
Mm,
Huge. Um, I mean, I think last year we looked at 3,500 cases just in a consulting perspective, and 80% of them are dealing with some form of mold toxicity. So, and doesn't have to be the main driver of the
mhm.
patient's condition, but
Sometimes
it's a contributing factor and it
yeah.
creates inflammation in the body. So,
Yeah. So people that are unfamiliar with mold, like what's ways that you could come in contact with mold? Because it's
rain,
not always in your house, right? Like it's
right,
not always that, which I think is how most
right,
people believe it.
right. Well, so you get cosmetics can have mold in them, and sometimes people use like parabens to control mold development in cosmetics, and so you get
Yeah.
toxicity of that. Then, anyway,
Yeah.
grains like pastas, breads, rices, that type of stuff. Cereals sometimes show up that way. Wine is a huge one where you
Mm,
can get mold like Stachybotrys. Water damaged buildings, obviously.
yeah.
So ventilation systems or lack of ventilation, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean
That's so good.
it's everywhere. You don't even have to see it in order to have it in your environment. Sometimes it's in the soil, and dust comes. Like I live on the edge of a metropolitan community, but like I could throw a baseball to the farms, right?
Yeah.
And so like wind comes out of the west and starts blowing, all of the debris that's in the soil and sprayed on the
Mm,
fields toward my house. Well,
yeah.
that's how I get it.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So good. Okay, that's
yeah,
awesome. So I want to circle back to something else you said because
yeah,
it dawned on me when you were talking about the gluten in the dairy, right? Like every time I walk into a new environment or community and I'm not eating because I don't know what's in the food, we
yeah,
get into this conversation about, well, why are people so allergic to gluten? It's all in your
yeah.
head. And I loved what you said about like it might not actually be the gluten.
Right,
People didn't have these allergies 30, 40 years ago
right.
because number one, either we weren't using that level of chemicals
Hmm.
or they did. We just weren't good at diagnosing it.
Yeah. And well, I think it might be a combination of both, but since the
Right.
Industrial Revolution, we've invented over 70,000 chemicals,
Right.
right? 70,000 is a lot. And if you think about the physiology that your body is operating with right now, your DNA is old, right? Your DNA is old. And it takes a while for generations to respond in DNA flipping switches and expressing certain
Sure.
traits and characteristics to be able to combat things. Well, 70,000 chemicals, it's actually more than that. I'm saying 70,000, conservatively, so that when somebody goes and looks at it, they can be like, wow, what in the world? 70,000 chemicals that your body had never come into contact with, your DNA for generations past has never come into contact with.
Yeah.
And so we started asking, well, why does everybody have these hyper allergic responses to things? Why? Where
Yep.
is this coming from? Well,
Yeah.
it's because these chemicals never existed, and there's a
Right.
lot of them,
Yeah.
and a lot of them are used in industrialized products that we participate in, like the plastic on those headphones that you have,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Phthalates or parabens or plasticizers, as you would call them, to make them stiff, and if you drop them, they don't break. That type of stuff.
Right.
Like that's can be a toxin for somebody that's
Right.
sensitive to it. Like, but the point is, you can't be afraid of everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So think of symptoms like a bucket, like you got a 5 gallon pail. If symptoms are water falling out onto my shoes, right? If I have a lot of different things that are contributing factors to the symptoms I'm experiencing, let's say it's headaches,
Sure.
and I get a headache, well, the water line is all the way to the top on that bucket.
Yeah.
If I want my headaches to go away, I got to figure out how to put, half of the
Mhm.
bucket filled with water.
Yeah.
I don't have to be like hyper vigilant on, I don't have to sit in my house in a bubble and avoid everything,
Right.
right? What I need to do is figure out how do I get my body to detox faster than the toxicity is showing up?
Yeah. That's so
So that
good.
there's a net negative,
Yeah.
like at least neutralize it,
Right. And I think
right?
that's just good advice for everybody as a whole. Like
Mhm.
the more your system's overloaded, the more stuff you're going to come in contact with. Right.
Right. And so people go, that's a good word you said, system. So people go, well, what's my system?
Yeah.
And so, for instance, you have four main detoxification organs. Okay,
Hmm.
you have your liver, your kidneys, your skin, and your lungs. The lungs
Hmm.
are the biggest one.
Yeah.
How many people are dealing with asthma?
Yeah. A
Right,
lot. Hmm.
truckload of people. Okay, how many people are dealing with kidney disease right now? A
A lot.
truckload of people. There's DaVita dialysis centers on every street corner.
Yeah.
Right,
Hmm.
like it used to be bars and churches, and now it's like DaVita and gas stations. Okay,
Yeah.
so but the point is that when we don't take care of our detoxification systems, or they get plugged by common
Overloaded. Yeah.
toxins, right? Like common toxins that would mess with your kidneys and your liver
Yeah.
would be biotoxins, molds, right? And so what are we left with? Our skin has to do it. Where does eczema come from? Well, oftentimes you can get, lesions in your skin from forcing your skin to detox things that it shouldn't have to.
Yeah. That's so good.
So super interesting. I think it's interesting
I think it's
anyway.
interesting too. I could talk to you all day about this, but I
Yeah.
also want to get into the spiritual side of
Hmm.
being healthy or unhealthy and like what that
Right.
looks like. And I know you have a ton of experience in this area. So what
Yes.
can you tell us about how that contributes to health?
Yeah. So I almost quit being a doctor about 10 years ago. Um, and the reason is that I started reading about people like John Lake
Mhm.
and people like, Curry Blake, and even people from like back in the day, like the
Yeah.
Wesley Boys, stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I started reading about how the spirit world was manifesting through them. And I say the spirit world um, because you see a lot of it today, all
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's not always a spirit that you want to participate with.
Right.
Okay? And in healthcare, there are a lot of spiritual influences in healthcare,
Mhm.
and I came up against a bunch of them, right,
I
in
bet.
patients. So
Mhm.
here's a couple of examples. Okay, um, patient shows up and they have a problem, and you say, "All right, I'll help you customize a lifestyle, health and healing, and
Yeah.
promote proper function." They get better, right, only to get worse.
Yeah.
Okay, why are they getting worse? Well, they're sabotaging themselves oftentimes. Why are they sabotaging themselves? Because there's a spiritual question that they need to answer, and it's this, right?
Mhm.
Did God make me sick?
Yeah.
Okay, is he trying to teach me something?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the religious mind, okay, I don't mean the spirit-led mind, I mean the religious mind.
Right.
Okay, like not Holy Spirit-led mind.
Right.
The religious mind, which is a set of rules, etc., has to rationalize everything.
Mhm.
Okay, which is why people rationalize a diagnosis. Oh, that's why I can't lose weight. Okay,
Yeah.
but the religious mind has to rationalize everything, and they say, well, maybe God's trying to teach me something through this illness,
Mhm.
right? And I found that I had a whole practice full of people that had that belief.
Yeah.
That's hard,
Yeah.
right? It's hard. And when people were willing to give the belief up, right, that God's trying to teach me something, they got better, pretty significant. Okay,
Yeah.
so here's the point. I always came down to this. If God's trying to teach you something through your illness, why are you here? Why why would you put me in front of that freight train? Right? Why are you trying to go against what God's trying to teach you? Why
Yeah.
don't you just focus on learning the lesson then, and maybe the illness will go away?
Yeah.
And guess what? It never did, right?
Mhm.
Because God's not the one making these people ill.
Yeah.
Okay? And so what I found out is that the regenerated spirit, the born again spirit, is a very powerful thing when we understand the mechanics of how it works.
Yeah.
And that health and healing that the Bible says that you have
Mhm.
can work its way into your body and through your body to express itself when you let it. But there's certain principles that it operates with and certain beliefs that are required in order for that to happen. God made me sick is the perfect way to slam the door on any health and healing showing up,
Yeah.
without somebody else intervening for you. And so here's what I'm saying. That power in your body that heals the edges of a cut together will do the same thing with diseases of all kinds, because
Yes.
that power that heals the edges of the cut together in your body is the breath of life that was breathed into Adam, right? And just passed down through generations to you. The problem is that that's like running on batteries at this point rather than being plugged into the source, because the source is him, life in
Right.
him.
Yeah.
Okay. And operating in that life is where the constant flow of life comes from. And
Yeah.
so sometimes it's hard for people to hear stuff like this because, again, like our religious minds, I was in the same boat. Okay.
Yeah. Me
My
too. Mhm.
religious mind wanted to rationalize my position, because if I didn't rationalize my position, it made me ask the question, what if there's something I don't know? What if there's something I haven't been experiencing the correct way?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was confronted by this, I mean, a lot of years ago, but um, I mean, I've had people manifest demons in my office,
Yeah.
right? I've had
Mhm.
like, what in the world, right?
Yeah.
I've had people call and leave messages that are like, I don't know what kind of doctors you guys are, what the deal is, but I woke up the next day and, these people aren't patients. These are people you just talk to, and
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit heals them, right?
Yeah.
They wake up the next day and they're like, what in the world? Like, I don't know what happened, but I'm healed. My symptoms are gone,
Yeah.
right?
Praise
And it's
God.
not me, right? It's not me.
No,
It's,
but it's what
you
you
know, you get a
carry.
group of believers together and the Holy Spirit is allowed to work in that.
Yeah.
Um, and these people aren't patients. So here's the question that you have to ask, Jen,
Yeah.
right? What's our responsibility then in participating in like living a quality lifestyle?
Right.
Why do that if we have this mechanism that can like overcome anything,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So like if you're sick because you're a coke addict, right? Like is the Lord just going to heal the heart attack symptoms
He
and you're just
might.
going to go on being a coke addict,
Yeah.
right? What if it's not something drastic like that? What if it's, you know, something that we're emotionally, you know, subtly addicted to,
Yeah.
okay? Like I think it all comes down to honor. And if there is that power, that is currently, I mean, you can read about it, you can hear about it on a daily basis. Okay. The power of the Lord that heals people, and it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
Honor it. That's all I would say is honor it.
Yeah. That's
Like
so
live a
good.
lifestyle that is, you know, honoring to that power,
Yeah.
right?
It's so good.
And I don't know, don't be afraid of everything that's, you know, around every corner. Just work on honoring living a lifestyle that is like in line with that power working in you and through you.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty interesting.
It is pretty interesting. I learned about the physical stuff first, and then I
Yeah.
learned about the spiritual things, right? And so it's like almost like this conversation could negate the whole conversation that we just had, because
Yeah.
if the Lord can heal us completely, you
Hmm.
know, I want to be able to eat gluten someday, like,
Yeah.
because I believe that the Lord can do that. So navigating that path, right? When you start to understand the spiritual side of it,
Yeah.
have it yet completely been healed,
Yeah.
I think is the place where there's a lot of tension, right? Believing
That's right.
for it,
Right.
but you haven't received it yet.
That's right. So sometimes I feel like the question is in your heart, you know, where you
Yeah.
ask, you know, Lord, would I trust myself, right? If I didn't have any, if I was just being guided by honor,
Hmm.
right? And like if I was just being guided by honor and the Holy Spirit guiding my choices in order to instruct me to live a lifestyle that's pleasing to Him,
Yeah.
would I do it? Or does my brain need rules, like
Mm,
written down rules to follow that become my 10 commandments, so to speak,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And I, it's, I want, like, our educated brains are super religious. They are.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
religion is an
Rules,
education,
law. Yeah.
and
Hmm.
education is religion. And you know, it's just it's interesting.
It is interesting. Any
Yeah.
advice for people out there that are struggling with this and want more resources?
Yeah.
Mentioned John G. Lake.
Yeah, they they have so many awesome resources at jglm .org. So John G. Lake Ministries.
Okay.
And I mean, or how about this? You want to get inspired, read a book about William Branham.
Okay.
Okay. Like I've got goosebumps just thinking about it right now. Um, read a book read a book about William Branham, and it'll change your perspective on what's possible,
Yeah.
and it'll make you to like start wanting to take steps to align your life with what's possible.
Mm, that's
Okay.
good.
And I think what you'll also find is that you'll start to move away from the standard American diet pretty quick. So
That's good advice. How do you well, I'll catch up with you and figure out how you spell his last name so I can link that in the show notes. Any
yeah,
final words before we wrap up here? Any final piece of advice?
yeah. We talked a little bit about what's happening in the last 2 years,
Yeah.
etc.
Hmm.
Um, just keep looking. Okay, keep looking for information, things that you can do in order to bolster your own immune system's response.
Yeah.
And if somebody gets something out of you being sick, you should probably ask, or at least take a second look at, how much trust you're putting into that person.
Yeah. Like if it benefits them when
Yeah,
you get sick. Yeah.
exactly. So,
That's great advice.
yeah. So I'll just say that. But,
And where can people find you if people have questions or want to connect with you for any reason?
so my website is biogenetics.com, and that is a company that we look after as far as building nutraceutical products, et cetera,
Yeah.
things that support healthy physiology as it was designed to be supported. But that's that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. What a great conversation. And thank you for listening.